we're gonna talk a lot about different kinds of visual support strategies over the next couple of days. And basically the way that I've structured the next couple of days is to start by sort of giving a bit of an overview around what visual supports are, why we would use them. We're gonna look at different kinds of visuals. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the evidence base in terms of, what does the research say? But I'm gonna kind of point you to, here's if you wanna know more about that, you can go and learn about that. We're really gonna focus on the more like practical and frankly fun aspects of visual supports. Every once in a while, a graph might appear. So, right, if you're research phobic, don't worry. There's not a lot of them. We're gonna talk about the different kinds of representations, the different formats that we can use for visual supports, and we're gonna talk about how to select the most appropriate kind of visual for a given child. So that's another important thing, right? Because all visuals are not created equally for all learners. And then I'm also gonna give you a few of my sort of handy dandy tips and tricks around materials and tools and what to buy and where you might wanna buy it and where to get things cheap. I've spent all my own money, so I'm really good now at spending other people's money. So I love it when I have a room full of people and I can show you stuff, get you all excited, and then I send you all off shopping. And right, so I kind of get a little vicarious shopping enjoyment from that, because right, I've already, spent a fortune on materials. Now it'll be your turn. The other thing that we're gonna start talking about today are the use of visual support strategies to help individuals understand information. So we're gonna talk about things like visual schedules, different ways of setting up visual schedules, how to use visual schedules effectively. We're gonna talk about using social narratives to help individuals understand social rules, social expectations, social contexts. And we're also gonna talk about contingency mapping as a way of helping individuals understand sort of behavioral choices. If you do this, here's what the outcome will be, and if you do something else, that's what the outcome will be, as a way of helping individuals kind of conceptualize in advance and learn to make more appropriate decisions about behavior. So we're gonna talk about that. We're also gonna be talking about visual support strategies that kind of fall under the umbrella of augmentative and alternative communication, the expressive communication part. So helping individuals make choices and convey what choices they would like. We're gonna spend some time talking about the Picture Exchange Communication System, or PECS. We're gonna talk about conversation books and look at different kinds of conversational supports, because that's also an area where a lot of our individuals have real difficulty. I'm a student, a disciple, if you will, of Pat Mirenda. If you guys know Pat Mirenda, you've probably heard her say something along the lines of, there's more to life than cookies, right? We can teach kids to ask for cookies really easily, frankly, but there's usually more about life than just asking for a cookie, and that's where conversation comes in, social interactions. And so we'll be looking at the different kinds of visual supports we might use to help increase social interactions and social participation. And then we're gonna spend some time on what I think as a teacher, right, because I spent a long time teaching in a classroom with kids and stuff, our visual supports focused on kind of skill acquisition and academic learning. And so that's kind of a favorite area of mine, and particularly sort of literacy-based instruction and academic adaptations and modifications to support kids in inclusive settings. So that's the part that I always get really excited about. So I've got loads of examples of that tomorrow. And then we're gonna kind of wind up with a little bit of kind of summing up considerations. What are some things that you need to think about before you go off and get yourself started? How might you sort of map out a plan in terms of where you hope to go, and how might you get there, okay? So that's kind of the big overview of what we're gonna do. Now, my background in terms of visual supports, I started my career a really long time ago. I was thinking about it not very long ago as I was walking to UBC, to the Scarf building where I teach sessional courses, and I was walking and it was the first week of school and everybody was looking very happy, and I thought to myself, wow, it was 1990 when I walked into this building as a teacher ed student, so it was a while ago. I taught at the BC School for the Deaf from 1993 till 2004, and I taught deaf kids with autism and other developmental disabilities. And one of the things that I learned really quickly when I was teaching was about the need for visual support. So people were talking about visual supports then, and I remember convincing my administrator to buy the Boardmaker software so that I could make visual supports. And I got it. It was like a Christmas present, but it came just before spring break, and I spent my entire week of spring break in the school library figuring out how to use Boardmaker, and I made a whole communication book. By the end of spring break, one of my kids had a communication book. I was very excited. So that's kind of how I got started in the area of visual supports. Was really I had a need. I had a number of students, because they're deaf, they also don't access information that's spoken around them. And they also primarily had a lot of difficulty getting information through sign language, right? So just like hearing kids with autism often have difficulty understanding spoken language, deaf kids with autism often have difficulty understanding signed languages. So I needed to come up with something that was gonna work for them to help them understand stuff. And so that's how I kind of found my way to visual supports. So then, probably at this point you all kind of have a sense of what visual supports are. But when we're talking about visual supports, we're talking about cues that are often concrete, right? There's something tangible in the environment to help people not only understand information, but also express themselves more effectively. So we're talking about understanding and communicating or expression. And we might use a variety of different kinds of visuals. So we might use objects, actual real objects from the environment to represent information, or pieces of objects, and I'm gonna show you examples of that in a little bit. We might use photographs, way easier today than when I started using photographs and was driving all over the Lower Mainland, taking 35mm pictures, developing them, they never came out, and I'd have to drive around and do it again. So way easier now. Black line drawing symbols, so a la Boardmaker, and we're gonna talk about different places where you can get symbols, but those sort of drawn out, they kind of look like real things, but they're not actual pictures, those kinds of symbols. And then for some individuals, text, right? If they're readers, text is also a form of visual support, and we use text as visual supports ourselves every single day. We also know, and if you've been to the iPad workshop that I've done many times for ACT, you also know that we can deliver visual supports via technology. Every so often over the next couple of days I might mention, oh, by the way, here's an app that's also really good for doing this, but this isn't the app talk, so I'm not really gonna spend time talking about visual supports on technology. It's a whole nother topic, right? I can spend a whole day just on that, and I have. So today we're just gonna mostly be talking about non-technical based. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with non-technology based visual supports. And in fact, in many cases, that's where I'll begin, even today when we have technology. I'll begin with good old-fashioned paper, Velcro, laminate when I'm teaching new kids, and then I might move them to technology later. There's a rationale for the use of visual supports, right? And we've got kind of theoretical understandings about why it might be good. And the whole idea that people need visual supports now is pretty much accepted. But I kind of want you to know that this kind of came from people doing some research and really looking at what are the characteristics of individuals with autism in particular, but also individuals with developmental disabilities that point us towards visual supports, that make visual supports a logical choice or a logical option. And one of the things that we know is that individuals with autism, and also sometimes other developmental disabilities, tend to have strengths in terms of their ability to think more concretely, to memorize things, and they often have really good visual spatial skills. They're good visually, right? And where things are visually. And that kind of processing visual information often is stronger for these individuals compared to processing auditory information, stuff that comes out of another person's mouth, and as soon as it's out, it disappears, it's gone, right? And for a lot of individuals with autism, when speech goes into the air and is gone, they've missed it because they're not processing as quickly as we're delivering language. And so they miss a whole bunch of stuff. And so that's really the theory behind using visual supports, is that it's a way of addressing one of these key challenges that many individuals with autism have. And then on top of it, well, we know that people with autism have real visual strengths. Why not take advantage of those strengths to make up for some of the challenges, right? And so that's really what we're thinking about doing here. If you think about communication in general and what's required to communicate effectively, we need to, all of us, need to be able to establish attention. We need to gain someone's attention, or we need to attend to a speaker, and we also need to shift our attention, right? So if Deborah said something right now, you would all shift your attention over to Deborah, and you'd do that automatically and quickly and easily. And then if Deborah finished talking and I started talking again, you'd shift your attention back to me quickly and easily. Individuals with autism often have real difficulty with that. By the time they realize that a different speaker is speaking and they disengage from me and they focus in on Deborah, Deborah's no longer talking. She's finished already. And I'm talking. And then by the time they realize that I'm talking and they've disengaged their attention from Deborah and shifted back to me, I finished talking. Think about this for kids in classroom settings and what happens in classroom settings. Conversation bounces around all over the place. Think about what happens just in group conversations, say around the dinner table or with friends. Conversation bounces. And one of the things that we know is that being an effective communicator, you have to be able to sort of shift your attention from one thing to another, and that's a real challenge for lots of people with autism. You have to pay attention to stimuli that changes rapidly all the time, and you need to pay attention to the relevant information and not pay attention to the irrelevant information. So if you hear crinkling of paper, if you hear some rain outside, you're probably not gonna pay that much attention to it. You might notice it, but I don't expect that you guys are all gonna stop and run to the window if we hear a big rainstorm happen. You might glance, but you can ignore that part because you know that you should be looking up here and listening to me. So you can kind of pay attention to stimuli that are changing. You can decide what's important, what's not important. You can attend to the right things. People with autism often have real difficulty with that. Communication means that you have to pay attention when there's information coming at you. You need to process, understand that information. You have to store that information, right? You have to remember it. And then at some point, somebody's gonna ask you something that requires you to retrieve that information. And then you need to send it back out, right? You need to communicate it some way. All of these things are things that individuals with autism often have difficulty with, to varying degrees, right? But communication is a complex thing. Right? When we talk about communication, we're not just talking about words coming out of our mouths, right? It's a very complex thing, and many things are going on when you're engaged in a communicative exchange with another person, right? What we know in terms of individuals with autism is that speech, right, which is auditory temporal. I hear things and they come out, and in terms of the time they disappear right away. That's really difficult for individuals with autism to attend to. Visual temporal, this is also stuff that in terms of time, it's there and it goes. This is why my kids with autism often had difficulty with sign language. I would sign, the sign is out and it's gone, just like speech comes out of your mouth and it's gone. So unless you can grab everything quickly and process it, you're gonna have some difficulty, right? So we've got this brief and transient through the air communication is what most of us use, right? And it's quick. What we know for individuals with autism is that they tend to do better with information that is visual and that remains in time and space. It stays in one space. So they can look at it for as long as they need to understand it, and they can go back to it if they need to in terms of remembering things. Now, how many of you as you get older find that you require that as well? Right, yeah. And those of you who haven't experienced that yet, I thought that that wouldn't happen. It happened. It will happen. So eventually it becomes useful for all of us. But for individuals with autism, especially because of the difficulties that they have, their preference often is for things that are static, things that they can come back and look at again and understand more fully, as opposed to speech that's there and gone, okay? So when we think about visual support strategies then, we're thinking about, how can we use these? And we can use these in a variety of different ways. We can use visual support strategies to increase independent functioning. We can use visual support strategies to make the world more predictable for people with autism. And if you think about individuals with autism, oftentimes their world is not very predictable. Imagine if you don't understand everything that people are saying to you and you don't remember things that people say to you very well, how is your world very predictable? Your life may feel perhaps like surprises are happening all of the time and you never know what's coming next. Now imagine if that was you in your life. Perhaps you might engage in some problematic behaviors where people are surprising you all the time. Stop this, let's go do that, we're doing this now. What do you mean we're doing this? Where are we going? I didn't understand. Right? So we can make the world more predictable, we can make life more predictable for individuals with autism by providing them information visually. We can use visuals to teach specific skills and behaviors. So we're going to talk today and tomorrow about different ways that visuals can help people learn specific skills, learn to do things, which sometimes is academic stuff, sometimes it relates back to independent functioning, life skills, job skills, those kinds of things. We can use visuals to teach rules and social expectations. So again, if you think about, what happens in the social world, there are a lot of kind of hidden social rules. Nobody explicitly teaches us these social rules. We kind of learn them by observation, by kind of subtle information that we might get in the environment. But a lot of social rules people haven't taught us directly. For people with autism, they often don't pick up on those subtle cues, and so they don't learn the social rules. And then they break the social rules and get in trouble for breaking the social rules. So we can use visual supports to make those rules and social expectations a bit more clear, okay? We can support communication and conversation through visuals, and so we're going to talk about expressive communication mostly tomorrow in terms of things like conversation books, but also in terms of things like making requests, so we'll talk about PECs as well. And then finally, access to academic intervention. So for individuals with autism who might have difficulty in the classroom accessing the information that the teacher is delivering to the class, sometimes we can use visuals as a way to help them access that information. And we can also use visual supports to help adapt and modify curricular activities so that individuals can participate more fully and more effectively. Okay, so those are some of the things that we're going to talk about.